and the 30th. Members have those minutes, I believe, and go through them quickly. Members, taking the minutes of the 16th of January. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Madam Clerk, on page 4, at the top of the page, second line, the second word, inadequate legation, I think should be legislation. Page 5, at the very first line, there's square brackets around the words according to. I think we can remove the square brackets. And in the same paragraph, 3 lines from the end of the paragraph, it has Roman numerals 2 and then the development. I'm not sure that's correct, because if you read the sentence, it says that he expressed certainty that the minister would provide further clarity on the matter. He said that NEPA has engaged a number of stakeholders and 2 final stages were left in the process. And one is brief the political representatives in both Portmore and St. Catherine, and 2, the development. I think that should be the development order. Yeah. Roman 2 at the bottom of the first paragraph on page 5. And then in the third paragraph on the same page, around the middle of the page, there's a sentence that reads, he highlighted the challenges experienced by NEPA with the professionals who submitted applications, as NEPA had to provide additional guidance to these persons in respect of how to prepare good submissions, which in turn added to the review process. I think that's the length of the review process. He's discussing the time it takes for things to be approved. I think it should be the length of the approved process. Page 6, page 7, page 8. On page 8, in the third paragraph, the first sentence, Member Bunting made reference to the Kirtvine disposal facility and said that there were monitoring wells near Porus. Is it monitoring wells? I've never heard of monitoring wells. Huh?
That's what we heard on the tape.
That's what you heard on the tape? All right. Yeah, monitoring wells. All right. Page 9, in the third paragraph, well, the one in the middle that begins with Mr. Hunter, in the second line from the end, the word, he has accepted, the governor of Jamaica, GOJ, has accepted that word that should be removed because it is already in the earlier part of the sentence. So it would just be that the governor of Jamaica has accepted the FIDIC prescription for the supervision and management of engineering construction work. Page 10, the second paragraph, opening sentence, regarding the analytical tests that form part of the quality management regime of a particular contract, Mr. Hunter said the FIDIC protocol requires the contractor to undertake these tests, which was against standard. I think it's again, which is again standard. Yeah. He was saying that that was standard, I think. Page 11, page 12, page 13. In the fourth paragraph that begins Mr. Barnett on page 13, towards the end of the paragraph, there's a sentence that begins, he told the committee that the required annual budget based on audit demands for water and sewage. Is it really audit demands or just demands for water and sewage services island-wide was 28 billion per annum? Does the word audit belong there? I don't think so. Just based on demands. Page 14. Page 15. In the penultimate paragraph that begins, the chairman questioned. I think it's the penultimate sentence, reads, he noted also that many of the NWC's works were done underground, sometimes under roads, under NWA infrastructure, etc., and it was not until after they begin the work that it was possible to conduct a reliable assessment. Remove the word to. Page 16. If there are no other amendments, would somebody care to move for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting of January 16th, 2018? So moved by Member Witter, seconded by Member Phillips. Thank you. Move to the meeting of January 30th, 2018. Moving quickly through as well. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10. If there are no amendments, would somebody move for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting of January 13th, 2018? Moved by Member Dunn, seconded by Member Guy. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you, members. Matters arising from the minutes? Any matters arising? There being no matters arising, we will move to item 7 of the agenda and begin with the review of the Auditor General's Department's financial statement assessment of the National Road and Operating and Construction Company Limited, NROC. And I would ask that the Auditor General's representative be so kind as to identify herself for the benefit of Hansard and lead us through the issues.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, colleagues. I will proceed with an overview of the financial assessment. A financial statements assessment of NROC was conducted to assist Parliament in their assessment of the financial performance in the context of the fiscal responsibility framework and the PBMA, which requires entities to pursue prudent financial management. I am Dolores Linton Williams. Consequently, we did an analytical review of the financial statements for the period financial year 2009-10 to financial year 2014-15. The review concentrated mainly of the calculation of financial ratios, and we mainly considered those ratios that would impact the financial viability and sustainability of the company. And we discovered mostly that the company was highly geared and that there were significant weaknesses in that area and that the liquidity position was minimal. Chair, we have 3 findings in the key findings, which entails NROC recorded consistent net losses over the 6-year review period, except for 2011-12. NROC's solvency position was significantly weak, although its short-term liquidity position was fair, and NROC continually had negative equity, indicating that the entity is over-leveraged, accumulating more debt than assets. So these are the issues that we had for review.
Thank you very much. Well, perhaps taking the issues one at a time. The first issue referred to relates to the solvency of NROC, which has remained weak throughout the period, losses having been incurred for all but one of the years covered by the period. And we have a response from, but there is a point made that funds are not provided to NROC for its day-to-day operations. It is so far has been able to cover its day-to-day operating expenses. It is really for its debt obligations that it is reliant on support from the government, which funds the interest payments and I suppose any principal payments that may have fallen due so far. And its loans, NROC's borrowings, have been guaranteed by the government of Jamaica. There is a letter, which is of June 26, 2015, in which the Minister or Ministry of Finance, I haven't seen this letter, but the Ministry will pursue actions to provide any required financial support for the operations of NROC in the foreseeable future. NROC, of course, is the entity owned by the government that granted concessions for the east-west and north-south toll roads, both of which were granted to private sector concessionaires. In one instance for east-west to Trans-Jamaican Highway Limited, a French-owned company, and in the case of the north-south to a company, North-South Highway or something like Limited, a Chinese-owned company. Any questions on issue number one? Member Guy.
Just something brief, Chairman. No funds are provided to NROC for its day-to-day operations, and the only obligation that GOJ has is to repay their debt. So how do they operate their day-to-day operations?
How do they fund
the source
it?
of that funding?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, some of the papers suggest that they have some investments, liquid investments that they use to cover that. But how were those investments originally funded? How did you acquire those? Yeah, and perhaps you could identify yourself, Mr. Anderson, for the benefit of Hansard. Yes. So there was a refinancing that was done in right. So that in the course of that buyback at a discount, some cash was generated through that transaction, which you have been using to cover your operations. And how long do you think you'll be in a cash positive position in relation to your operation? How long do you think you can sustain yourself in that way? 2 years, yeah. And yeah, for 2 more years.
I'm sorry?
I think that was a sotto voce comment. Any questions from members? Any other questions on that? I would just ask, what is the anticipation? I mean, at the end, when those resources are expired, what do you think will happen? Do you anticipate that you will earn any revenues from either project by that time, or is it when are your projections as to when you would actually start to see distributions?
So we expect that somewhere between 2022 and 2023, could be earlier. We would expect to see some amount of revenues being generated and coming in from the East-West Highway, from the French-owned company. As the members are aware, where there are surpluses, so where the maintenance cost of the highway is paid, and where the interest is paid, any surpluses are shared 50-50 between ourselves and the developer, the French company, for the highway. So we expect that somewhere around 2022, we would start to see income being generated from the highway.
And when is it that the concession agreement with the East-West It's a 30-year.
It's a 35-year concession agreement
35.
to run until 2036.
36.
Was it not extended as part of a restructuring?
No,
it was not.
No, it
Okay.
wasn't. So it's still 2036.
6.
35
5
years
years.
from 2001.
So 16 years are remaining on the concession.
Issue 2.
Chairman.
Yes.
Question. Mr. Anderson, in terms of the original, when the project was conceptualized originally, what was the break-even year you were looking at?
So when the project was originally conceptualized in 2000, it was anticipated that by about 2008, 2009 would have been generating surplus revenues. However, the traffic projections have not been what was anticipated originally.
Member Jackson.
And Mr. Anderson, the operator still not taken up the model that would look at increased volume to increase revenue. It's a perennial question. One, you take, for example, the Portmore leg. During the late nights, the low volume period, the rates are just the same. No incentive to utilize that and earn more revenue. And the other one, Vineyard through to Maypen, the same thing. And you guys have been adamant that you'll keep the highway empty during those periods rather than earn revenue, though at a lower rate, that will boost your overall income. I'm making a plea, Mr. Chairman.
That's apparent, Member Jackson.
And I seem to have fallen on deaf ears in NROC and their associated entities. But I'm pleading. In fact, a lot of the traffic that is now on the Mandela coming into Portmore, for example, could be alleviated if even the late hour traffic, many people would rather use the toll road. But if they have a lower rate, they'll use it instead of going around Mandela. So I'm renewing my plea with your finance model people. Even test it for a period to see what the difference is. Nothing, what's a grade 18 doing it. So, Mr. Chairman, you hear my
Any
cry.
comments on that, Mr. Anderson?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's something that we'll renew with the operator. That's an issue we've been discussing with the operator, but that's obviously the operator's decision. It's in his best interest as well to maximize his revenues. But as we have discussed many times, a reduction in tolls is only beneficial to the extent that the revenues increase faster than the, so if you reduce tolls by 10%, you have to get more than 10% traffic in order to compensate for a reduction in the toll revenues. The operator, as you know, has a number of incentives which are in place for frequent users at a number of plazas, but that's again a decision for the operator to review.
But you have an interest in it too. The government has an interest in it too because you share the surplus, ultimate surplus. So to the extent that there are potential revenue enhancing packages that could be contemplated, they should be explored.
Right, so we have been exploring a number of them, the areas for bringing on new traffic onto the highway, for opening up new exits and entrances. Some of those have been done, and we continue to have those discussions with him. He is currently looking back with his traffic advisor to see how we can optimize revenue or how we can maximize revenue, and that's something that we expect we will see shortly as well.
Member Guy?
Thank you, Chairman. On the point, following up on the point made by Member Jackson, Mr. Anderson, have any studies been done along the lines that Member Jackson is suggesting in terms of a reduction leading to a greater traffic count or greater usage of the toll road? And secondly, the point was raised by the chairman. You have vested interest to see that there is some money coming into NROC. 2010 is 11.7 to 9 years ago and you still have not seen a profit based on the original projection. Is there any way that you could, quote unquote, force the operator to look in that particular direction? Because as is indicated, you have interest there to see that, some profitability accrues to the company.
So yes, a number of studies have been done. The traffic advisors review the operation almost on an annual basis to see how they can maximize revenues. But as you're aware, the risk currently is with the developer. So if there is a reduction in tolls, for example, and the revenues, there's a shortfall in revenues, the risk is 100% with the developer. We don't share that risk with the developer. And as such, we don't have control over how the developer sets the toll rates, except to say that the toll rates have to be below the cap, which is established by virtue of the concession agreement.
Yes,
Member Witter.
Yes. Traveling on the highway, my experience some time ago, I noticed that you had some discounts on weekends and so. What is your impression now on those interventions?
Yes, so as we indicated earlier, the developer actually implemented discounts at a number of the plazas at Spanish Town. He has frequent user discounts, which he's currently still implementing. Those obviously provide some amount of benefit, but as I indicated, based on the current traffic advisor's recommendation, they don't see a reduction in toll rates as being any proposals that they put forward yet.
Can we move on to issue 2? The second issue raised by the Auditor General is that NROC has no revenues as income earned from the toll highway is transferred to the concessionaire, the owners of the highway. Well, they're not really the owners of the highway, but they do have a sublease of the highway for 35 years. And management's response is that cash from the operations over the period has been used in keeping with the NROC loan conversion agreement with the concessionaire, which applies cash first to capital expenditure, maintenance, and debt service. Any surplus cash is then shared 50-50 with NROC and the developer as distributions or dividends. But to date, no distributions or dividends have been paid to either the developer or NROC. The response to that from the Auditor General's Department is that the loan conversion agreement was seen, which stipulated the order of priority in the application of cash, and is set out in a schedule to the agreement. And you have indicated, Mr. Anderson, that based on your current projections, you foresee distributions commencing in roughly 22, 23, is that what you said? Yes.
That's correct.
And are they anticipated to build up over time thereafter, or
Yes, that's correct. So the existing loans of the developer are expected to be repaid by about 2024. And once those loans are repaid, then 100% of that debt service, which was then being paid to the banks, would now obviously revert to the operating company, and hopefully 50% to us as well.
Yes, Mr. Phillips.
But that is hoping that there's no major infrastructural work to be done by that time, or you're hoping that you would have taken care of maintenance. But I mean, you have areas that may need just complete resurfacing, and you're hoping that after the debt has been paid down, that you wouldn't have to do that major work that will so that you can now see revenue from it.
No, in spite of that work that needs to be done. So there is currently what is called a major maintenance reserve, which is built up over the years in the developer, which is used for the maintenance and repaving and those items that you mentioned on the highway.
If you mind, if possible, what is the sum in that?
I don't have that number here. That's in the developer's financials.
Is it an actual cash reserve?
Yes, it is
set
actual
aside?
cash.
Yeah,
which is set aside for maintenance.
It's not like the bauxite reclamation obligations, which are not set. All right. Any other questions on issue 2? Member
Mr.
Dunn?
Anderson, you said that by 2024, the loans will be paid out.
Right.
And you also said earlier that you project by 2022
Yes.
that you might be in a better
Right.
position. So what are the revenue enhancing measures you're actually putting in place to realize this in 2022?
So, as we indicated before, so the operator is responsible for running the highway. He has a number of promotions which are ongoing. Some of them you may see with the users of the highway. We talked about some of them, some of the discounting schemes which are in place. He's trying to maximize the number of people who have tags, which would allow him to then to offer even wider use and even more discounts. He's working with some of the gas station operators to get cards in place which will be able to be used at the toll plazas as well. So those are all things which the operator is doing in order to maximize his revenue.
But is your, Mr. Anderson, is your projection that you would start seeing distributions in 22-23 as a result of enhanced revenues by that period, or is it as a result of the debt service of the developer having come down sufficiently that it will throw off some more cash to the bottom line?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So as we go along, the debt service as a percentage of overall revenue is going to decline. And by then, we expect that there will be surplus cash being generated. So after we pay the maintenance, after we pay the debt service, operating costs, then there will be surplus cash, which will then be able to be shared, even before the entire loan is paid out.
Just, NROC is seeing, even though there's a concession,
right?
Is there a business plan by the operator that is shared with NROC to see how it is that they're going to increase revenues? Because on an annual basis, when they get the toll increase,
right,
and you get the toll increase, but yet still there is still not an increase in vehicular throughput on the highway itself. I would imagine that at some point we'll say, what is it then that you are doing to bring additional vehicles and not just rely on that increase, the toll rate increase?
That's the bottom of my
Because, I mean, I use it, well, fortunately not 5 times per week to get the benefit of the tag. All the tag does for me is really just convenience. I have never benefited from, and I mean, I spend close to $20,000-$30,000 a month on toll. And I don't see any benefit from spending so much money, but it's just a convenience. And you would imagine that somebody that spends as much as I do, or other members in here that has to use it, that you would see some benefit so that you can bring other persons to use it. But is it that they share a business plan with you before we discuss about an increase to see how it is that they're going to be attracting more users of the roadway?
So there is a financial model which is developed for the highway, and that financial model is updated almost on an annual basis. That financial model projects, going all the way to the end of the concession, the expected revenues, which are expected revenues, expected costs, expected debt service, expected profits on the highway, going all the way through. There is, in fact, an increase in traffic. So in fact, this year we are seeing maybe about a 7% increase in traffic over last year. There is an ongoing, I mean, between 2007 and 2011, there was a general decline in traffic, not just on the highway, but also if you look at the free roads on Mandela as well, there was a decline in traffic. Since about 2012, we have seen a gradual increase in traffic, and traffic has continued to grow, and this year has seen the strongest growth over the past few years in terms of traffic.
And I would imagine you'll see it because partially the construction has taken
not just
place.
On Portmore.
Yeah,
not
but
just on Portmore, but also at Vineyard.
Yeah, but if you had at the start of the project itself or the highway where you thought that you would start seeing revenues from 2008, 2009, and you have not seen, you're nowhere near that, right? Because you're now down to 2022. Then the model itself, if you're sticking to the same model.
It's updated, he said, each year.
Yeah, but you're seeing the increase in traffic use of the highway is still minute compared to what was expected. So you would think that even though you're updating it, I would expect to see something different in the model, Chairman. Because, as I said, I mean, I hit off $10,000 on my toll in a week and a half, but I don't see any benefit.
Mr. Anderson's already indicated that the pricing model and the issue of discounts and that sort of thing is really the operator's responsibility. They bear the risk, the primary risk, although the government ultimately bears
that's
risk.
That's my point.
But they are the operators, and so I suppose you can cajole and consult and encourage and so on them to take any obvious measures that might, on a net basis, increase revenues. But
more forceful control.
No, but Chairman, yeah. the NROC is holding up what this says here about $7.3 billion in debt to do with the roadway. NROC represents the government. You're a shareholder of the roadway?
No,
is it? No, but
no.
We
have, in terms of the highway?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of the highway, we are entitled to 50% of the free cash flow, which is what we discussed before. But we are not actually a shareholder in Trans-Jamaica Highway, which is the operating company. So as the chairman mentioned,
so you lease the highway to Trans-Jamaica?
Right. So 100% of the obligation, for example, to service debt is the responsibility of Trans-Jamaica themselves.
But you are the holder of the debt of some of the
debt. There's debt, separate debt.
Right.
The developer has debt for building the highway, and you have debt for certain contributions you have made.
To the developer,
yeah.
as well, right.
To the development of the highway.
Yes. Initially, they had there was a grant or funded obligation, which they had to borrow money to finance. But when was the last time that you had to put money in to the finance?
So we have not put money in since the beginning. Since when we refinanced in 2011, when we did phase 1B to take us from Sandy Bay to Maypen, we put another approximately 15 million US into the highway. But the bulk of the input that we've made in the highway has been at day one, at the outset.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderson, could I ask you about the north-south link? Somewhat different model, I believe, financially, because the government of Jamaica didn't put up any cash for that.
That's correct.
There is a transaction where the developer there, which put up over 600 million US to build it.
That's correct.
And reimbursed.
Huh?
It's at 120 million.
Right, that's correct.
Yes.
Pardon me?
They have spent on land. Yeah.
Spent a lot of money.
On land acquisition.
On land acquisition.
Yes. But they own that land. The government owns the land.
No, some of it was private acquisition.
Yeah, but they bought it and own it.
Yes.
The government owns the land.
So it becomes asset in the highway.
Yeah. Well, it's leased to the concessionaire, but the cash to build it was provided by the concessionaire.
That's correct.
Could you give us an update on the land aspect of that in relation to the land that the developer is supposed to receive and develop as part of that whole arrangement? Where have we finalized those lands? Are they identified now? And what have they been transferred? Are they being developed? What's happening with that?
So there's approximately, so as you indicated, in the case of the East-West Highway, the government of Jamaica actually provided cash up front. So we provided about 110 million US initially, and then we provided additional amounts, as we mentioned, when we were doing phase 1B. In the case of the North-South Highway, the government didn't provide any cash, but provided lands for development. So it wasn't lands that we gave to the developer, it was lands that he had to develop And if he didn't develop it, then it would have come back to the government of Jamaica. So approximately 1,200 acres of land was included in the agreement to be provided. Approximately 200 acres of land has been transferred, was transferred in January of this year. There's another 200 acres of land in Miami Bay, which includes about 50 acres on the coast and about 150 acres on the land side. There's another 600 acres in the Caymanas area, which Cabinet has approved for transfer, but those have not yet been transferred yet. And then there's another 400 acres, which we expect will be somewhere in the Lidford area, in the Golden Grove area, which will make up the overall 1,200 acres of land.
The 200 acres that has been transferred is where?
In approximately 50 acres on the coast at Miami Bay in Ocho, on the western side of Duns River, and approximately 150 acres inland in Miami Bay.
And could I also ask you, what is the revenue sharing arrangement for the north-south link, and when is it anticipated that distributions would be received by NROC based on current traffic levels and projections?
So in the case of the north-south, there was a section of roadway which we had built when the concession was given to Jamaica North-South Highway Company, which is the Mount Rossa section. So the 120 million US that we had spent on that section of roadway has been converted into a loan to Jamaica North-South Highway. Apart from that, there is no revenue sharing on the North-South Highway. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Jackson.
The Caymanas lands, what is the status of that transfer?
So the pre-check plans are being done. They've just been finalized, and so we're moving through the process now to transfer them.
Because I had some discussion with the operators there regarding the development, and their contention is that they are unable to do anything because the lands have not been fully transferred as per the agreement. And let me just go back a little to the east-west. That corridor that has lands along it, that's supposed to open up new development. Can you give us an update on why nothing has happened and just the status of that?
Sorry,
no,
sure.
There are some lands which we were advised along the east-west corridor that were earmarked for development. Now, of various kind, but there's no development taken in that corridor, at least that I'm aware of. So I stand to be corrected. So is NROC the catalyst for that, and if not, who? Which entity?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
because that was part of the whole highway package.
No, so the East-West Highway does not include any lands for development. There is no agreement to provide any lands along the East-West for development.
What Mr. Jackson is saying is that
I'm aware of
part of the reason why we did the East-West project and Highway 2000 was that there would be a multiplier effect of economic growth and development from that investment. And it was anticipated that there would be development, not by NROC or by the concessionaire, but by other developers, flowing from the fact that there was this highway running east-west. And he's asking what has happened with that.
So, well, we can't comment on that because we're not involved in it necessarily. We have been, so a number of developers, for example, NHT has been talking to us about getting new access onto the highway. Longville, for example, there are a number of new phases of Longville. There are like 3 phases of Longville already done. There is phase 4 and phase 5, which are planned to be done. We're in discussion with them about how we can bring them onto the highway. There are new developments taking place at Busher Park, sorry. But there are Burnage Lodge developments as well, which we're looking at as well, how we can bring those onto the highway as well. The Busher Park developments, we're also looking at how we can bring those onto the highway as well. But so there are a number of developments now taking place because of the highway.
Yes.
And we are in discussion with a number of those developers about how they can connect onto the highway.
Could you just indicate, in relation to the north-south, quid pro quo land, 1,200 acres of land,
Right.
What are the development projects that are anticipated for the different parcels that are going to the Chinese?
All right, so in relation to the Mara Bay, the initial proposal which has been provided envisages approximately 2,200 hotel rooms and some amount of residential developments at Mara Bay. We have some initial proposals for Caymanas, which includes a mixed use of development, which include light industrial, commercial developments, and some amount of residential developments as well. But all of those have to go through normal planning approval processes
and
be approved by the various entities.
And for the Lidford lands? You mentioned some lands.
The Lidford lands, we anticipate housing to support the development along the north coast.
Member Guy?
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, what is holding up the development, say, at Miami Bay? You mentioned they have to go through the approvals. But from what I recall, there was a certain time period within which the developer would have to start development of the land. And from my recollection also, that particular time period would have already been passed. So what is holding it up? And if my recollections are incorrect, can you correct me there?
So the time frame for the development to be done start ticking when the lands are transferred to them. And as I indicated, no, the lands for each area that we're talking about. So in the case of Mara Bay, those lands were transferred to them in January of 2018. So the time frame for those lands start ticking at that point in time.
3 years? Is it 3 years?
It's 7 years, it's approximately 7 years for the hotel development.
Could I ask you, in relation to east-west, the further extension of the highway to Williamsfield, where is that? What is the current status of that phase of the project?
So the section from Maypen to Williamsfield has now been incorporated in the South Coast Highway Improvement Project to be funded by the Exim Bank of China. Those loans have been signed. We're expecting to start acquisition of lands this year, well, in the 18-19 financial year, and we expect that construction will start towards the end of the 18-19 financial year.
And so that is going to have a different developer and operator to the rest of the east-west?
Right, so in that case, the government of Jamaica is borrowing the money for the development and for the implementation of the project. And so all the revenues which would come from that section would then come to the government of Jamaica.
So who will operate the highway?
That's something that we would look at now. So it could be Jamaica North South, it could be Trans-Jamaica Highway, or it could be somebody else.
But it will be a toll road?
But it will be a toll road, yes.
And do the traffic projections indicate that it can generate surpluses after the debt that you borrow? And over how quickly do you anticipate that there'll be positive cash flow after debt service for that section?
So the current cash flow or traffic projections don't indicate that it will be able to service the debt. And so some support is going to be required, obviously, from the government of Jamaica in terms of servicing the debt until the point we get to where the revenues from the highway will be able to fully service the debt.
And the duration of that debt is how long?
It's a 20-year facility.
Facility from the Chinese Exim Bank.
Right.
Any other questions, members? If not, we could go to the...
Chair.
Member Bunty.
Yeah, I just wondered, having now operated the toll road for almost 20 years, are there any lessons we've learned from the experience, particularly east-west, that would inform how we do things differently going forward, or, for example, might inform how you're doing this upcoming phase, which is badly needed? I think, Mr. Chairman, we sometimes assume that a toll road must stand on its own when it has, commercially, when it has wider developmental benefits, and the alternative would be for the taxpayer to bear it 100% instead of at least being shared between the user and the taxpayer, which is perhaps a fairer model. But I really just wanted to know, as it has evolved, because we started this process in the concept was started way back in the 90s. And looking back now, 20-odd years of experience or thereabouts, are there any lessons we've learned that would cause us to do things differently or should inform how we do things going forward?
Well, there's a whole document that we've put together now along with the CDB. The CDB actually published a document about lessons learned from the development of the highway. Caribbean Development Bank actually published a report on lessons that we have learned.
Members, please.
But two things that I'd like to mention. The ability to get more people on the highway. Yes, just about lessons learned in Jamaica in the toll roads, published by the CDB. But how do we get more people to use the highway? So the way the East-West is structured, the only time you pay a toll is when you go through the toll plaza. And therefore, it doesn't lend itself to people coming onto the highway early and getting off early. And so finding a way to get people onto the highway and get them off and only charging them for the section that they have used. So currently, if you go to Vineyards, once you go through the Vineyards toll plaza, you pay for 34 kilometers of using the highway. Whether you drive on it for 20 or 10 or 5, there's only one rate. And so trying to find a way to get people to pay only for what they use. And that will involve probably some amount of cashless toll plazas, where we just allow people with tags to get onto the highway, and if they, the same tag that they use, they get off of the highway as well. And that's something that we'd like to move towards. The issues which the developer obviously has is the issue of people coming on and off without paying, and how to get them after. So right now we have a problem, for example, where people go through the toll plaza, piggyback behind a bus, for example, and go through, and trying to find these people after is a significant chore. I mean, we have a full-time team of police trying to find these people. And so if there was a way, for example, to ensure that if somebody violates a toll, the operator can be sure that they'll get back the money at some point, whether through at licensing, preventing him from licensing his vehicle, preventing him from insuring the vehicle, then that is something that I think will have a big impact. And that will actually move us towards not necessarily having to have a tag, but just using license plate recognition, because we can't do that now. So we could actually allow somebody to drive through the highway without a tag, if we were sure that we'd be able to collect the revenue at the end of the day. I think that's what we'd like to be able to achieve.
Yes, member, please.
No, just coming back to the Maypen to Williamsfield, and your earlier comment that with the traffic numbers now would not be able to service the debt itself and would need some. And Chair, just thinking about it, is nearly $1,000 already, one way for the vehicle I drive. So you're probably looking at 2 more toll plazas, probably the same amount that it would cost on the north-south at $2,500 one way. Yeah? I mean, for the regularity that I use the highway, I would not be able to use it at that cost. So I would expect that you would see a reduction in probably vehicle traffic on the highway coming from Mandeville to Mandela, if it is that you're going to end up paying probably twice the amount that I'm paying now. Is a toll road the best? I mean, I can probably Pierce can answer this or not you. Is the toll road the best option for that leg right now, if it is that the government of Jamaica is the one taking this debt and will having to be subsidizing it otherwise, and not a realignment of the existing road or expansion of the existing road going through? I mean, is it anticipated that the toll rates
per kilometer
Won't
for
be
this new
reducing.
section that will be built will be less or equal to or more than the toll rates per kilometer for the existing east-west corridor?
Well, obviously that's something to the government of Jamaica, because obviously the government of Jamaica will own that section of the roadway. But what we would anticipate if we run it as we do now, then it will be based on the same rates per kilometer that we have now.
Well,
And the financial models that you would have showed,
yes,
the
are
China
based
Exim Bank to raise that debt would be showing what in terms of toll
the
rates?
same rates per
same
kilometer.
rates per kilometer. But it's a government guaranteed loan, so in a sense.
So could we then, I mean, I know, for example, that the existing east-west developers had an option of to do that leg.
Right.
Presumably that hasn't happened.
Right.
But why is it that the government is opting to go the route then
Instead of
doing the toll road itself
instead of a realignment
as a
of that stretch.
100% GOJ risk commercial operation as opposed to some other approach to...
Just like we did with the north course in realignment and just improvement of the roadway, size of roadway verges, than taking on another debt that taxpayers will have to then service, because as much as it will be a benefit to me, but I know that personally.
Yeah, I'm a bit puzzled at how
With the
you're
salary that I
arguing
get
here.
as a member of
As a
parliament.
Manchester MP.
Yeah.
I must tell you. I mean, when the entire east-west traffic in Jamaica was bottlenecked in Porous last Friday evening because a NWC pipe burst in the road.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, things like that, the Scots Pass, again, very vulnerable. We must have a proper east-west corridor to service everything beyond Clarendon. Thank you, MP Witter. I think if we only focus on the commercial value on that strip, we will miss the national developmental impact that it has. And I also was a bit, I heard Mr. Phillips speak of, he was saying what benefit he gets for the amount that he spends. And I think he was talking from a discount point of view. But I have spoken with business people who calculate down to the wear and tear on their tires, on their trucks, their commercial vehicles. And notwithstanding the high rates, when they take into account the utilization of the vehicle, the savings in fuel and wear and tear on the tires and the rest of the vehicle, and the increased efficiency that the vehicle is now able to make, 2 trips, for example, to the North Coast in a day rather than 1, they all work out that it is in their interest. So I think we have to be careful not to look at just a narrow commercial viability in the toll roll model for a particular strip of road, but look at the national developmental impact that it has on the whole area serviced. And so I think the idea of sort of just upgrading the existing Scots Pass Porous is going to be very limited, because these are already built up areas with limits as to ability to widen the road to 4 lanes, for example. You just couldn't do that in a Porous, for example. So it's going to need a total new realignment. But I think one of the things I would say to the NROC team, I think you probably need to do a little more public education, and even for the developer as well, to point out some of the other benefits of utilizing the roads that maybe only the more sophisticated commercial entities are able to calculate, and so that the average small truck owner or commercial private operator may not be able to calculate the benefits, and perhaps this is one way that you could increase usage.
Let me just clarify something though, Chair, please. I am not saying that, to Member Bunting, that we do not need an improvement in the roadway on the south coast. Right? Because I remember, if my memory served me well, Member Bunting, in the original upgrade of that south coast, that Maypen to Williamsfield, was to get rid of that Clarendon Park to Porous was to go through St. Toulis and those areas in acquiring land, and there was some difficulty in acquiring land through there to bypass Porous. That was years ago, right? Now, the North Coast Highway itself works effectively. That area between Maypen Roundabout to Clarendon Park carries the traffic well enough. So my thing is that why not upgrade it as we have done the North Coast Highway and try and get lands to bypass that area of Porous? Because the truth is that if you look at the vehicular traffic, even though there might be a minute increase on the north-south, the cost in itself, to not commercial persons who are basically going to be collecting on the other side when they deliver a product, and they can put the cost in the product. For persons who are just going to work on a regular basis, $2,500 or more on a daily basis is quite a lot, even with the convenience of it. And I'm just saying, if I was to plan to really to get a roadway, where I would be looking is really to bypass Spur Tree if you're talking about commercial activity.
How much debt is it anticipated that you'll be borrowing to do the Williamsfield leg from Maypen?
Approximately 188 million US.
Okay. And had the existing concessionaire on East West, had they done that, they would be the ones taking on that debt, would they not?
Yes, but they couldn't take it on because they didn't have the revenues to support that level of debt. They couldn't have paid that level of debt. But as Member Bunting pointed out, the benefits of the highway are multiple. So you have significant time savings. When you look at the north-south, for example, we're saving somewhere of the order of 8,000 man-hours per day on that roadway. That is like another 1,000 people in your workforce working. On the east-west, we have significant vehicle operating cost savings as well. So when you look at the overall economic impact of the highway, it is significant. It is greater than 12%. In addition to that, what the toll road does is not burden all the taxpayers of the country with the cost of this roadway. It allows the people who are using the roadway to pay a significant part of the cost. And it allows them options. Yeah, but if they don't want to use it, then they don't have to use it.
Yeah, but you're saying that with the current model,
yes,
the per kilometer, whatever you charge now, is what you use to see, you, as in your words, the current model will not pay for the loan for the additional.
From a financial perspective.
Exactly.
From an
so the rest of the taxpayers are going to be paying for it?
Yeah, but
because they have to find some other way.
But they're not going to be paying 100%.
I understand that.
But if you did the old road,
I'm just putting another option on why doing the north. The difference between the north-south is that you had Flatbridge and you had Mount Russell and all of that. We can see the benefit of it. The section, as I said, because we have realigned the north from Negril to Port Antonio. Right. It takes less time. Yes. To leave from Ocho Rios to Montego Bay to Negril, right, or even to Port Antonio. Right. All I'm saying is that as part of the redevelopment of the South Coast, cost-wise, as another option, why not look between Maypen to Clarendon Park in the same model as we did on the North Coast, purchase lands to bypass the porous section, where you save some money. Because the reason why I'm making that suggestion, even though the horse done gone through the gate. No, the horse done gone through the gate. One, cost to the traveling public, is it that we're going to see an increase, a reduction in the using? Because we are assuming that the same amount of vehicles will be using the roadway, that more of regular all taxpayers will be paying more of the loan than those who are using the roadway. We're assuming at this point. At this point in time, when the rest of our road network is as it is, you are taking away additional resources from the taxpayers or from the consolidated fund to pay a debt when the rest of our road works is just the model that I'm looking at. So as I said,
essentially your point is a refinement which says extend from Maypen to as far as possible in the normal way that one would extend the road, like and then only have the toll section being the part that you can't.
Chairman, it doesn't even have to be a toll.
Yeah.
As I said, what you're doing, as we have done, as you're going to do to Montego Bay now, to find a bypass from the town through to bypass Montego Bay, the city itself. It's the same way you'll be finding lands, the same lands that they're going to be using to realign, to do the highway. Is really to bypass ports, because that is where the wasting of man
we have not in the past had a government, 100% government-owned and risked project done as a toll road.
No, we have not.
So this is a new concept that you're introducing to try and shift from the taxpayer and the consolidated funds some of the related costs to the user. That's essentially what you're trying to do. Members, I think the other issues we've already covered on this, so I think we can move on unless anybody has any other issues.
Anderson, there is a long struggle to get the tag where you can pay online for the tag on the east-west.
Yes.
That has happened.
Yes.
When is it you get to the point, both east-west and north-south, that you can use debit card and credit card to pay when you're on the line? For persons who don't have tag. I remember an incident some time ago. Right. But just to increase the flexibility of payment methods.
One tag for both.
Can you not pay?
No, two different
top
things.
up the north-south tag? Can't be topped up online?
Not yet, not yet.
Oh.
So that's something that the developer is currently working on. He has some issues in terms of some of the toll plazas where they are located in terms of wireless communication. But it's an issue that we're actively working on to see how we can get to that point, as I said, where we can use cards.
Yes, for payments.
For payments.
For payments.
For payments,
yes.
And also the other suggestion
for
a one tag across both network.
Yeah, that's something we also looked at before we opened the North-South. We looked at what will be required. There's going to be some investment required to upgrade East-West to come in line with the technology that is used on the North-South.
We have to increase convenience to the travelers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you, PS. I don't know, does the next section affect you as well? It does. Everything affects you, PS. So, members, we will move on to the item 7.2, which is the Auditor General's Compendium of Special Audits and Investigations Report on Selected Entities, re Parts 1 and 2 of the report on the UDC's divestment of the Oceana Hotel Complex and the Ministry of Finance and the Public Sector's lease of sections of the Oceana Hotel Complex ground floor for use by the Accountant General's Department and renovation works.
This is your order.
Thank you very much. Okay. Welcome those who are joining PS Sewell for this. I see the Acting Financial Secretary here, Ms. Morrison. Welcome, ma'am, and your team. We will. Right. Perhaps we could just have the introductions of the persons who have joined us, starting with you, sir.
Dr. Damien Graham, General Manager, UDC.
PS Sewell is there, Acting FS
Kerry Morocana, Project Manager, UDC.
Donald Hamilton, Deputy General Manager, Finance, UDC.
Okay. Madam Representative of the Auditor General, perhaps you could. Mr.
Okay, I'll
Clinton
proceed
Williams.
with the overview. So we conducted a special audit to determine whether UDC's disposal of the Oceana Hotel Complex and the lease of the Jamaica Conference Center multi-story car park was done in accordance with UDC's estate management policy and guidelines. We assessed whether proper due diligence was conducted in relation to the Ministry of Finance's lease arrangement of the ground floor complex for the Accountant General's Department. We also did seek to determine the reasonableness. We did not seek to determine the reasonableness to dispose of the assets. We found that UDC did not always adhere to its estate management policy and guidelines or consistently undertake decisions in a transparent manner. We have 6 key findings in the report, sir. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So we have the key findings listed at pages 5 and 6 of the prompt, and we have them listed, well, they're followed by the issues, which I think are the same. So we can probably just turn to page 7 of the prompt and start there.
No, you don't have that.
So the first issue raised concerns a valuation that was used by the UDC as a basis to assess the offers that were received in response to its request for proposals. The offers were assessed in September 2013, and the valuation that the UDC had was a valuation dated August 2011. And its guidelines of 2012 stipulated that the UDC is to obtain 2 market valuations before selling or leasing an asset. And those valuations should not be older than 12 months. The hotel complex was advertised for sale in August 2013, so that it was using a valuation that was 2 years old. Management has responded and accepted that it did use a valuation that was 2 years old. The response says that the board and management of the UDC deemed it uneconomical to procure another valuation as the asset was a deteriorating one. The sale has to be contextualized against the background in which it evolved. The property was first offered to the National Health Fund for $350 million in May 2013, which is the same year that it was ultimately sold to a subsequent bidder. The NHF was purportedly purchasing it on behalf of the Ministry of Health, and the UDC board was prepared to accept that offer, but the transaction broke down, as I understand it, because the cost of making that deteriorating asset and bringing it into a condition where it could be occupied by the new owners were prohibitive to the National Health Fund, so they decided not to proceed with the purchase of it. And they also say that monitoring is in place now to ensure greater compliance. Any questions on that issue?
Mr. Chairman, I think, having myself for many years been involved in public sector divestment, it's not unreasonable for the UDC to use a 2-year-old valuation. These valuations are very costly. When you have buildings that are trying to be sold for sometimes for a decade, to be doing valuations every year, is really not a commercially wise decision. And I think it is, reasonable. UDC is familiar enough with property values and the movement in property values from year to year that even while it might technically be a breach of their policy, I think from a commercial perspective, it could be regarded as a fairly reasonable decision.
Is it the case that that building had been subject to a public health notice when the Ministry of Health was occupying it, that it was not safe for occupation, and they were therefore making plans to move out as a result? I mean, I remember visiting that place myself a decade ago, and it was a pretty dingy.
Yeah, I think
interior.
It was described as having sick building syndrome or something like that.
Yes, there was a Ministry of Health condemnation on the building for.
That's why the ministry had to move out.
In the event, the transaction that you entered into subsequently was at a price of 385 million. Is that right?
That is correct.
Plus 10% of the ultimate net profits of the project. That is what I've read here.
The price that we entered into was 385 million. We initially had the valuations that were on hand was for 18 months, I should point out. So it was 18 months old. And the price that was offered at the time in May was 350 million, which would have been just below the value of the last valuation that was done. So it was very clear to management and the board that at the time of transaction, though the valuation was current, the perceived value by the market, having gone to the market twice before, was below the valuation that was there. We ended up settling on a value of 385, and it was done after going to market, having the first negotiation having broken down. We recognize that in the second point, the comment in relation to the evaluation criteria was that we provided 4 criteria and not all the bidders met every particular. The board was also advised of that, and we recommended moving ahead on the statement of the sale price, which the board then approved based on the bids that were presented and the concept for the renovation for highest and best use.
Does the transaction that you entered into with the successful bidder, and I understand that there was a higher bidder who subsequently dropped out because they couldn't raise the financing, and so you went to the bidder who you ultimately closed it with. And is there a 10% profit share arrangement with them as well as the $385 million price? No. That is stated in the documents that we have here, that was part of their bid.
No, that arrangement is not a part of the transaction.
It's in the bid papers that we received and the offer papers that we received. I don't know if it was subsequently negotiated differently, but it is there over the life of the project. And in fact, I think...
Chairman, if I may, part of the document we have the proposal from Century 21, which was acting on behalf of the current owners. Option 2, offer price $360 million, deposit of $36 million, second deposit of $324 once UDC can confirm, vacant position, and as you said, 10% of profit payable when project is 95% complete.
That's right. That's what I read, so I was asking about that. But apparently that isn't correct.
Chair, in the report at paragraph 1.26, it says, subsequent to the communication of the board's decision, the approved bidder sought to modify the proposal by increasing the purchase price by $25 million to $385 million and removing the 10% profit participation. On December 18, 2013, UDC board accepted the increase offer of 385 million.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. All right. Any issue 2 relates to the
Chairman, I wonder why, because initially one of the option 1 that was presented by the same purchaser had a 385 million deposit of 38.5, UDC to register a mortgage, etc., and UDC entitled to 20% of the profit from the venture. It suggests to me that if we just accepted 385 as the final determination of the selling price, that we would have lost out on something that they initially had proposed. 385 and at the end of the day 20% on the profit from the venture.
There's a Schedule B to the original offer, which sets out the 2 options. And apparently, that was subsequently varied. So maybe you could explain the decision to accept a higher price in cash and relinquish the profit share.
One hour before you respond to that. I'm not sure I understand what Mr. Guy was.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm to repeat my understanding of the question that Member Guy just raised, it is what led to the acceptance of the negotiation that the proponent entered into by the then board of accepting the higher cash offer and foregoing the 10% share of profits estimated at 20 million. 20 million. 10% share of profits.
Option B, Schedule B, Option 2
yeah.
was a $360 million price plus a 10% profit share.
Oh, is this one he's talking?
Option
one.
A was a $385 million price. But the terms of payment were more suspect because it included, apart from the deposit of 38.5 million, it said that once the project was considered viable and the company was ready to proceed, there was going to be a vendor financing arrangement. So essentially, there was no further money payable under that option, on account except over time.
Right.
So, and then there was a 20% profit share offer in that regard. So the board essentially had preferred the first, the other one, the 360 million plus the 10%, and then subsequently it was more short, cash up front, but then there was the 10% profit share was set aside in exchange for the price, the cash price going up by $25 million. Is that right?
That's correct. I'm not privy to all of the minutes except the extracts that were provided. And it would appear through the discussion back and forth and presentation by management that the board, in relation to proceeding as expeditiously as possible, as well as being minded for a higher cash benefit in immediately transacting, went for the $25 million increase with the understanding that the refurbishment would commence immediately, which would stimulate the development.
Okay. Issue 2 related to the process, essentially, that the terms of divestment, which require, there was some mandatory information that should have accompanied each bid. And apparently not all the mandatory information was received from each of the bidders. Nevertheless, the UDC decided to proceed with one of the bids, and when that bid fell through because they couldn't finance it, they move to the other bid, which is a bidder who ultimately has bought the place. And the response of management is that they accept the observation that not all the mandatory information was provided by the bidders. None of the bids were responsive in every particular, they say. However, the management and board considered the urgent need of the disposal and made a decision to evaluate the bids based on price. And they make reference to a PDC directive. I'm not sure what that stands for.
PDC means Planning and Development Committee, a subcommittee of the board.
Thank you. To accept the highest bid at the time, as well as the board paper which set before the board the various criteria that were advertised and not met. On this basis, that committee reviewed it and accepted an offer based on the pricing. Any questions on that, members? No. All right. The third issue, there is evidence that the UDC evaluation of proposals against criteria outlined in the RFP was not presented for audit scrutiny. So the manner in which the proposals were evaluated against the criteria that was outlined in the RFP, the Auditor General was not unable to find evidence as to how that was done.
Yeah.
Yes. And the response of management is that this is most unfortunate and reflects the processes that were used at the time. They say that since then, committees have been established to evaluate any matter advertised through the tender process, and that there are two committees now, one that deals with the sale of land and the other that deals with concessions and leases. There are prescribed forms where the evaluations are recorded with scoring by the committees, and this is sent to the general manager for acceptance after the committee signs off on it. The recommendation is thereafter made to the board. Member Bunting.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a point of clarification. Is it that at the time, the evaluations were scored by some method, and it's those forms which cannot be found, or there was no method, no formal method used to evaluate? I'm just trying to understand, is it just a matter of the documentation not being available, or was it not done?
It does say that the UC indicated that they were unable to locate the minutes and evaluation sheet to support the analysis done by the PDC, the Planning and Development Committee.
So, but you see, unable to locate could mean either it was never done or it was done and lost subsequently. I'm just trying to find, is there anybody who was around at the UDC at the time that can advise?
Just to clarify that at the time when the audit was being done, the evaluation sheet and the minutes reflecting the decisions taken at the PDC were not located and provided to the auditor. I have since located those documents and had attached it in the updated response. So the amended response, which indicates the PDC decision and the board decision, were what would have allowed the Auditor General to see evidence of the evaluation. The way the process was at the time when evaluations were done, they were scored, Member Bunting, and it was presented to the committee and the decisions taken there. So the method of evaluation was taken, and you would see in the response there are extracts of emails which would have presented the evidence of how it was scored. Okay, we, subsequent to that, had adopted a refined
I'm trying to find
policy.
The one you are referring to. I don't seem to have that.
What is the cover page on it?
It says the cover page has extract from the 19th Planning Development Committee
this
meeting.
One,
yeah. So it contains the decisions taken by the...
I don't think we got that one, sir.
It was sent by email. There's a memo of October 20th from the general manager to the PDC on the proposed sale, and it goes into some depth on, and then there is a sort of, in tabular form, the different bids are set out in 4 tables, and there's some analysis of them there with
Chairman.
attachments. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Are you therefore saying, GM, that the management response dated February 8th, 2018, that there are, however, since that time, committees have been established to evaluate any matter advertised through tender process. We advise that there are 2 committees, one that deals with sale of land and 2 concessions and leases, and that there are prescribed forms. Is it that this establishment was subsequent to your finding those reports that were not able to be located, or are you saying that these forms existed prior to the report being, finding, and that they are what existed before, or are they just what exists now?
They are what existed subsequent to 2013. So we refined the procurement policies for the corporation, and at that time, the then general manager instituted those 2 committees to back up the procurement division that was set up within the UDC to refine all of the procurement policies that are there. At the time of the audit, when the Auditor General would have come in last year to look at the findings, they would have been seeing evidence of other transactions done subsequent to 2013, which would have carried those forms, and therefore it could have been interpreted that there was an absence. But there were actually 2 different policies that were being used at the time. And unfortunately, when the assessment was being done, the records reflecting the PDC paper and the board paper were not located to present to the Auditor General.
I understand that, but my little concern, Chairman, is the date of management response, which is February 8th, 2018, to suggest that this is most unfortunate and reflect the processes used at the time. Now, I am now being advised that it is not really unfortunate. Probably what was unfortunate was that they were not able to be located.
I think that's what he's saying was unfortunate.
Yes.
That he couldn't locate the papers at the time.
Yes.
Yes.
Not,
Yes, yes.
There's an ambiguity in it, but that's how I read it.
well, I didn't interpret that way, Chairman.
Yeah.
Sorry, but even the filing and how the documentation was stored was an issue. So that is the unfortunate part, that the person who had custody for the document had left, but then, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Issue 4. The UDC made a decision to lease the multi-story car park, the Jamaica Conference Center car park, which adjoins the property, to lease it to the successful bidder of the hotel complex without opening up the package opportunity to all bidders in breach of its own policy. UDC negotiated the lease with the bidder after accepting the bid and included it as a condition of the sale of the hotel. And the lease is for 25 years with an option for a further 25 years of the car park. Cabinet approved that in August 2014, and the point made by the Auditor General is that the way in which this was done would have denied existing and prospective bidders the opportunity to reflect that value in their bids. The response of the, well, I should just mention that the lease requires payment of $15 million over the first 10 years, with the remaining 15 years subject to a market rate review. This is the car park we're talking about. The response of management is that UDC accepts that the option was not open to the market, but the management considers it an exception as provided by their policy. So, is there anything more to be said on this? You put the hotel to market. There was no mention of parking in the RFP. You went through a bidding process, evaluation process. You decided to go ahead with the one that has ultimately bought the property, and then the question of parking came up, and you leased the parking lot to them. Essentially, that's what happened.
Yes, essentially that's what's happened. In relation to the context for the decision, the UDC has a redevelopment plan for downtown Kingston, and we understand that parking is an issue, and that an attractive development or redevelopment of the Oceana Hotel would require adjoining parking. Under the divestment guidelines, an exception is provided when there is a property owner that is adjacent to, or the property is considered to be strategic in relation to being a hotel, and such developments that would spur strong economic activity. It is on that basis that management and the board considered the request during the negotiation to look at, or subsequent to the negotiation, to look at leasing the car park to the proponent. And it is under that context that the discussion about car park came in. It was not open in the initial discussion, but in light of the greater development for downtown Kingston and what the investment required in terms of support, the consideration was made.
Did the developer or purchaser who leased the car park undertake any upgrading of that car park, any capital expenditure on the car park?
Yes, they have. The car park was in need of significant upgrades and improvement, and their proposal was to undertake all of the improvements necessary to make it a modern car park that would not only serve the hotel but also the adjoining areas. And in light of that proposal, the deal was structured to permit the rents that are outlined in the schedule, in consideration of the capital that the proponent would put up upfront to rehabilitate and improve the car park.
Have they executed those works?
Yes, they have. They have not completed all of it, but elements such as resurfacing, putting in new concrete members, electronic access, and electronic payment have been put in place. And new entrances have also been created.
Member Bunty?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chairman. On the very first, so on page 2 of the briefing report, there is a chart that has public expenditure exposure 36 million, and it has 4 boxes around it. The one at the top says 591 million excess charges on the lease of a section of the Oceana complex. Is that all related to the difference in parking rates?
I think that's to do with the car park. I think that's to do with the lease of the ground floor areas by the Ministry of Finance and the extensive refurbishing and upgrading, is not?
No. I mean, from my reading, at least a component of it appears to be these different rates between what was recommended by the Commissioner of Lands for parking rates.
It makes no reference to parking, does it?
Yes.
That box.
No, the box doesn't. But when you go around to the final page, it speaks to
Page
issue
what?
5.
Page what?
Page 6.
Page 6.
Issue 5.
There's a page 12. You said the final page, but yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm talking
of the key issues.
Of the
Of the key findings. Yes.
It speaks to the Ministry of Finance and Public Service agreed to pay 77.4% and 39% more for rent and parking spaces, respectively, on AGD's behalf against the Commissioner of Land's advice. So I'm trying to see whether this...
But that relates to the parking that the Accountant General would have leased or secured for their staff, etc., having leased the ground floor for their new premises.
Right. So I'm trying to understand, is this where the 591 million on the front page comes from? because it speaks to by not following the Commissioner of Land's advice, and this here is talking about by not following the Commissioner of Land's advice. I'm just trying to tie them back together. Perhaps the Auditor General's team could.
That has to do with Ministry of Finance.
The additional 591 million will have to do with the lease period for the 7.5% that they agreed on in the lease agreement. The decision will cost the government an additional 591 million over the lease term when compounded at a 7.5% as agreed in the lease in 2016. The lease to rent the floor space in the Ocean Hotel, the ground floor.
I think, Mr. Chairman, she's confirming that this is the issue that's referred to in the box.
Yes.
Around the front.
Yes. It is. It is.
You're having technical difficulties? No, I think because the figures come back. The 591 is the same 591 referred to in the box. So I'm confident that this is referring to these two tied together. But what I'm not clear.
Which two tied together, sorry?
The issue 5 on page 6 of this highlighted thing, and the top box of the key statistics on page 2.
I see the top box. I see issue 5. I'm trying to, because maybe that I'm looking at a different version. Yes. It's page 11. Okay.
How long is it lease term?
I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to find a reference to the 591 in relation to issue 5.
About the third sentence in the narrative at the start of issue 5, it says
this decision costs the government.
This decision, right?
Right. Okay.
So I'm saying this appears now to tie us back to that first box.
But it's not just a parking, right? It's
a parking and
the premises as a whole.
Right.
Yes. All right.
But there's two points. But first, just a clarification question. You said an additional 591 million over the lease term when compounded at 7.5%. But should this be when discounted at 7? Because you usually look at these at present value terms. So I'm trying to understand, first of all, I mean, is this in some future value which you're going forward to and you're compounding interim payments to the end date? I mean, we normally more speak in present value terms and discounting. So I'm just trying to understand the 7.5%. You're discounting or compounding?
The lease agreement actually states that the rental will go up by 7.5% annually.
So this 7.5% is the increase?
Yes.
And the 591 is?
It's broken up in, it's approximately 561 for the floor and 30-something in relation to the car park.
To the car park.
Right.
Okay. And so these are not discounted into present value terms.
No.
These are just taking the aggregates of the figure over a lease period of how long?
10 years.
Over 10 years. So basically, it's 59 million a year additional. But this is just based on the Commissioner of Lands coming up with an estimate, and you comparing the estimate with what the market would bear, and then
the actual agreement,
and then assessing the difference as a loss or an exposure. I'm not sure. I mean, this seems to be
the additional cost to the government if they had stuck to, as against if they had stuck to what the Commissioner of Lands recommended.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there is a market for property that the Commissioner of Lands cannot change by decree.
But the Commissioner of Lands
just the Commissioner of Lands gives you an estimate of what he thinks you should rent property at. But if there is no owner of property willing to rent it at that price, and in order to get it, you have to pay a higher price.
Especially when the owner of the property knows that there's tremendous pressure to move the Accountant General's Department out of Justice Square so that the Court of Appeal and the DPP's office can be expanded, which has been something that the Court of Appeal judges and the DPP have been bawling for years and has not happened, and various attempts have been made to find space to move them, which have fallen through, and this is the one that's available. There was tremendous pressure to conclude a lease for this space which was available. That's part of the context.
I understand how they've arrived at this figure just by comparing, but it seems to me a sort of arbitrary thing for the Commissioner of Lands to just declare that this is the rental rates they should take. The market determines these things. These things are not determined by decree. And assuming some effort was made to find alternative accommodation for the AGD's department, was it? I mean, I remember this was going on for a long time, and I remember it was causing great distress to the Ministry of Justice.
It was.
In moving forward the whole thing. So now, in hindsight, to just compare this with, what they had to settle at, because that's what the market demanded at the time for property, and say because the Commissioner of Lands decreed this figure is what they should pay. I mean, quite frankly, I don't think it has that much relevance, but certainly should not be deemed as a loss because we couldn't get the land at get the rental rates that the Commissioner suggested.
Yeah. Would the Ministry care to just indicate how the rental rates that were derived by the Ministry for the Accountant General's space, were they negotiated rates?
Yes, they were negotiated.
And did you attempt to get the best rates you could from the landlord?
Yes, we would have attempted to get the best rates that we could. There was, in fact, a valuation done in terms of the rental. It indicated that it was just below the market, just above, sorry, the market.
It was a valuation by a private valuator?
A private valuator.
Okay. So that was issue 5. We had addressed
4. I have a question here on 4, Chairman.
Yes, please.
Question being asked a while ago, the sales and what have you. It says that on August 18, 2014, Cabinet approved the sale of the Oceana Hotel along the terms agreed by the UDC. The lease of the car park, was that approved by Cabinet? Did that go to Cabinet also? They approved the sale. Did they approve the lease?
Yes, it is customary. Well, it is processed that once a lease is approved.
So the sale and lease was approved by Cabinet in 2014.
Yes.
All right. Any other issue on issue 5, which is to do with the costs that were incurred in leasing, the Ministry leasing space from the new owners at the rates specified there. And you have the space for up to 25 years, is that right? You have.
Yes, it's a 10-year lease, but with options to renew for 5 years, going up to 25 years.
And significant leasehold improvements, investment was made in making the space ready for the Accountant General and suitable for the Accountant General's department to move into, because essentially you leased a shell, as I understand it, which needed to be built out so that you could move them there, and there was a significant investment in that. And the idea is that that would be recovered over the life of this lease.
Of the lease, yes, that's correct.
Right. Issue 6 concerns the actual works that were done to build out the space for the Accountant General to move into, and various overruns and the like that were incurred, and there were various variations that were done and so on. So the prompt says that on March 14, 2016, the ministry and the contractor signed an agreement for the construction build-out of the Accountant General's offices, and that contract was for 400.09 million. The works were scheduled to commence on April 1, 2016, with expected completion on July 31, 2016. However, inadequate planning resulted in variation costs of 52 million, or 13% of the contract sum, and the payment of 9.2 million for time overruns. As at January 27, 2017, Section 1.5.3 of the Government of Jamaica's procurement guidelines indicates that for contracts in excess of 300 million, cumulative variations in excess of 10% will require the National Contracts Commission endorsement and Cabinet's approval, but no approval was obtained for these variations. Management's response, it says, please refer to pages 2 and 3 of the February 8th, 2018, which I assume is this, is it? Yes. Yeah. And they go through in some detail the different components that resulted in these costs being incurred. And members, do any members wish to comment or ask any questions on these? There were various variation orders which resulted in these additional costs. But the point is that the final sentence is that the Cabinet approved the net variation of 74.051 million on the construction build-out of the offices of the Accountant General Department by a decision of May 1st, 2017. So there was ultimately approval by Cabinet of these variations and the costs that were incurred therein or thereby. Members, any further comments on this matter? If not, I think we can move on to any other business and just thank the ministries and permanent secretaries, financial secretaries, UDC, general manager, and other team members for coming and for helping us through this process.
Thank you.
Any other business? There being no other business, date of next meeting, I think we'll have to sort of adjourn this one for a date to be fixed, given that we're entering the budget period. Yes. All right, members. The adjournment. Would someone care to move? Moved by Member Jackson, seconded by Member Bunting. Thank you.
The Oxford Dictionary defines service as the action or process of serving or an act of assistance. But with due respect to the Oxford Dictionary, there is service and there is service above self.
Service launch 273 control.
Roger, control. Go ahead. Over.
From information received, a man is observed in the water at Lime Key drowning and he needs some assistance.
Roger, control. We're proceeding to that scene as quickly as possible.
baby, come here. You understand, so I have to send you to your auntie so you can go to school and turn out better than me.